Hi, I'm Chip Childers, Vice President of Product Strategy here at CumuLogic. Today I want to give you a very short demo of the CumuLogic Database-as-a-Service platform's MongoDB edition that we've recently released. It's fairly easy to get the software up and running rather quickly, and we've got instructions for how to do that posted on our site. And we're also making the CumuLogic controller available as an image in the Amazon Web Services marketplace. Once you have the controller installed and you've created a user for yourself and you log into the UI, what you'll be presented with is this dashboard. Now in our Enterprise Edition, the number of services is much more than just MongoDB, but in our MongoDB Edition, we're very focused on MongoDB as an engine, as a option for users to self-serve, to provision anything from a single node instance, a multi-node replica set, up to even development scale and production scale sharded clusters. As you can see, when I've logged in, I'm initially presented with a dashboard that tells me how many MongoDB service instances have been deployed. I've got 2 running, none in progress right now, and none terminated. I'm able to launch a new one, and if a subscription had been made available, basically a pre-configured environment setup that could either be for the purpose of replicating the same type of environment repeatedly for multiple copies of the same application, or it could just be because your IT department wanted to create more of a service catalog. Those would be listed here, and it would only require one click, a name, and asking to have the service launched. However, what we'll do today is we're going to walk through the process of launching a new MongoDB environment. And this is kind of the advanced method for how you do it. There's only 2 screens in this wizard, so we've kept it as simple as we can so that you're able to make the correct configuration choices, but you're not presented with too many options, and really you don't have to do a whole lot of work because many of these things will default for you. So the first thing we'll do is we'll name the cluster. In this case, we're going to call it default instance. You could provide it with a description. Again, in this MongoDB edition, we're only supporting MongoDB, so that's the engine that's available. In our other versions of the product, you'll see things like Couchbase, or using the relational database service, you'd see MySQL as well as Percona, and we'll be adding Microsoft SQL Server and Oracle as well. The next thing we'll do, because we've selected Mongo, we now have a choice. We can choose to deploy a single node, which would be what you'd expect. A virtual machine will be instantiated and the MongoD process will be started on it. Or we can instantiate a replica set, that'll be a multi-node environment. Or we can build out a sharded cluster. And a sharded cluster can be either production grade or development and testing. For production, what we'll do is we'll deploy 3 query routers, 3 config servers, and then each shard will actually be a multi-node replica set. And so as you add additional shards, which I'll show you in a little bit, it's really just one click, a new replica set will be created, and then the config servers and query routers will be updated to be aware of that new shard. For the development and testing type, what will occur is you'll get 1 query router, 1 config server, and each shard will simply be a standalone node of the MongoD process. You can select a target cloud. Now in my environment, I've got both Amazon EC2 as well as a cloud provider called Cloud Central. These target clouds are made available to you by your administrator. Any instance that you deploy will be deployed using your API keys into that target cloud, or via API keys that maybe your organization's made available for all use within the CumuLogic platform. Depending on the target cloud, you may have a choice of availability zone. In this case, we're going to select US East 1 within EC2, and then you'll get to select the instance type. We'll go ahead and pick a small instance. I can go ahead and also tag the cluster that we're going to deploy with whatever's useful. In this case, it's defaulting to testing. I could tag it with, app1, or really whatever purpose you might have for creating tags on top of the services for the purpose of metadata is available to you. Access group, the access group represent network access rules into and out of the deployed environment. I'm going to not select a specific access group because what will occur then is that the system defaults will be used. If I wanted to create an access group of my own, or even once this is deployed, modify the access group that gets applied, I would do that in the left-hand side here using the access group section of the dashboard. Since I've selected to create a sharded cluster that's development test scale, I can go ahead and move on, and I will now be able to decide the name of the initial database that will be created within the Mongo services. I'll then be able to also create a username and its password and describe an initial collection that we're going to focus our sharding on. I'm going to then select automatically hash on ID. There are some other options for how you handle sharding. You can specify the specific key, you can specify whether to hash it or not. We could modify our character set or the port that Mongo would listen on. Clicking continue, I've just got one more set of questions to answer before we go ahead and launch the new sharded environment. The first one is that we could select a parameter group. Now, parameter groups are, and we'll show this a little bit later, but parameter groups are ways that you or the administrator of the CumuLogic system can codify best practices for tuning the configuration of deployed Mongo environments. You could tune it for read intensive, write intensive, really any number of types of deployments, and reasons for tuning lower level config values are where you would use parameter groups. If you don't select it, the system defaults work extremely well. That's what we do all our testing on, and you can just leave them as is. The next thing I have to decide is how much storage I'm going to initially attach to the environment. So we're going to assume at this point we need about 20 gigs worth of storage. I could then enable backup services. Now, backup services let us select a retention period. I'll pick 10 days worth of retention, and I'm going to go ahead and allow it to run at midnight each night. I can also set a maintenance window, which is done by selecting a particular day of the week and a particular time of night, and I'm going to select 1 a.m. on Tuesdays as the window for this particular cluster. Now, this is useful because if you go to change something like the parameter group in the cluster, you have the choice of applying immediately or staging that change and letting it be applied automatically on your behalf during the next maintenance window. So I'll click Submit. Looks like I have to actually create one with a different name. And it's off in provisioning. Now, if we want to, and what we just got dropped into is the list of clusters that I have deployed. If we want to, we can come in here, select the default instance 2 cluster, we can select the event tab, and we can watch all of the discrete provisioning steps that are going to occur. And this includes the instantiation of the virtual infrastructure that's going to be where we run each one of the nodes of the environment, as well as all of the specific software configuration tasks that would occur. So let's go take a look at an existing shard cluster that I've deployed and walk through what the tabs are that we have available to us. So what we have available to us is some basic details. This is the configuration metadata that we select when we initially launch that cluster. Again, we have the events available. We also have access details. Now, this is going to give us visibility into all of the various nodes that make up the environment. This is a development sharded cluster, but if I were to drill into a production sharded cluster and click on this host name field, I would see multiple nodes, all of the nodes that make up the replica set for that shard. I can also see that I have one query router and one config server. And each time you look at one of these, you get a little bit more detail. What we're displaying is the public IP address that Amazon is providing to the instance, which we also see here, but we could use the public DNS name, private IP, or private DNS name if that's useful for us. The next two tabs are about usage data. This will tell you effectively how much storage and how many objects exist within each database, and then broken down by collection as well. So all of the collections and all of the databases in the deployed cluster will be here. You'll be able to see how many documents, total data size, and then total size of the cluster. I'm sorry, of the collection itself. Users, this is where you see the user that was actually selected when the environment was initially created. If we were to add a new collection, which is an operation I'll show you in a minute, you also have the opportunity to add users. They would all be listed here. The only action we can take is to actually delete that user. The next tab are the logs. Using the logs, we're able to select a particular host, and this will pull back the appropriate log files from that host. So it gives you good visibility and transparency into what's going on in the deployed environment. You can pull this data back and use it with other tools to inspect for how your application is actually performing. More importantly, you can troubleshoot any problems that you might be having in the environment very easily from this console. The last tab I'll point to is the MMS agent tab. We have an integration with MMS, the MongoDB management service that's offered by MongoDB Inc. And I'll show how that works momentarily, but what we allow in this scenario is that if this host has been added and we've deployed a Mongo agent or an MMS agent into the availability zone that the cluster exists within, you see instructions for how to add that actual host into MMS, and you also see instructions for how to access the MMS console. So let's go take a look at some of the actions I can take against this cluster. I'm able to modify it. When I modify it, I'm able to change things like the backup settings. For this, I did not enable automatic backup. I could do so here if I chose. I could also choose a different parameter group for the cluster, and then I could apply it, or I could choose to have it be modified during the next maintenance window. I could choose to restart the service. Now this will actually initiate a restart on all of the processes within the environment, so it effectively resets everything. Next, I could terminate it. This will delete all of the actual provisioned infrastructure, all the VMs, which means that the service goes offline. But the metadata that defined this cluster will still exist, and you'll be able to reinstantiate it if you wanted to. Because this is a sharded cluster, I'm able to add a shard. Adding a shard will allow me to just say add new shard. It will take care of the details of deploying either the single node that will be in the shard or the replica set nodes that will be the shard, and then also the updates to the query routers and the config servers. I mentioned that we can do things like adding a user or adding a collection. These are what you'd expect. So if we add a user, we would be prompted for the database, the username, and the password. If we choose to add a collection, then we need to provide a few more details. So the database name that we want to create the collection within, the username and password that will have access to that database, the name of the collection, and then because it's a sharded cluster, we'll have to make some choices about how we're going to shard that particular collection. The last thing I'll point out is within the actions for a sharded cluster is that we can clone the entire environment. And what this will do is it will allow you to create, at the moment that you make the request for a clone, a snapshot automatically of all of the relevant data and configuration of the environment. An entire new cluster will be stood up, and then that snapshot will be applied. You could think of this as a really easy way to create perhaps a staging copy of the data of your production environment so that you can stage a new version of your application, or even do a cutover if you're okay with some data loss during the transition period. I'll go to a single node that I deployed earlier just to point out that some of the actions are slightly different. In this case, we don't see the option to add a shard. What we see is the option to add a node. Now this is a single node, but if I add a node here, we'll actually deploy 2 additional nodes and it will become a replica set. Now this isn't a sharded environment, but it is a fully functioning replica set that will have multiple MongoDB processes available that your application can access. So let's move on and take a look at some of the other features we've got on the left-hand side. We have snapshots. Now I have one snapshot that I created prior to recording the demo. This snapshot I created manually using the Create Snapshot button here. You can see where you select a deployed cluster, you name the snapshot, and then that process will kick off. We can also restore from snapshots, which means we can come in here and select a named snapshot. We can create a name for a new cluster, pick the zone we'll deploy into, size the instance, potentially modify the storage, and modify the port. The other action you can obviously take for a snapshot is you can go ahead and delete it. Now, since it was created manually, it's not going to have a backup retention period policy applied to it. So keep that in mind if you create snapshots manually. Once you're done with them, you should clean them up because you'll be storing that data if you don't do that. Now, for snapshots that are being created through the automatic backup process, you notice that I established a retention period in days when I launched my new cluster. I had also established a particular window for when the backup would occur. Now, the controller will take responsibility for running a backup job nightly and also cleaning previous backups that are outside of the retention policy. Our monitoring graphs view gets you some visibility into some useful statistics that are relevant to both the virtual machines that make up the environment, as well as the actual Mongo processes and some metrics that are specific to MongoDB. So you can see at the top, obviously, we have some general CPU wait time, total usage, process queue, load average values. But as you scroll down, you can also see that we get things like total operations, reads, total transactions, transaction size or transmittal size and receive size. All of these are useful when you're trying to understand the performance of your environment. And if for any particular metric, we can drill into it. We could even modify the total number of hours that we're going to get visibility into. This cluster is not that old, so I'm only able to get a couple of, it looks like about an hour worth of data here. I mentioned parameter groups earlier, so let's take a look at a parameter group. They're really easy to create. You would just click the Create Parameter Group button. You would select the family. In this case, MongoDB is the only available option. I'd name the group and provide it with a description. Once you have that group in the environment, you're then able to go in and take a look at some of the specific parameters. So we could, for example, modify something like the no Unix socket Boolean value. We could also modify the object check, and you can see there's a description of each one of the parameters that you're able to tune within the MongoDB instances. Next, I'll show you the access groups. Access groups are, as I mentioned earlier, the network ACL policies for how traffic gets into or out of any particular Mongo environment. Now, for each MongoDB instance that's deployed, if I don't specify a specific access group, a new one is created based on the defaults that have been configured for the environment. And you can see all of these are actually fairly default, and they're very wide open. You, in your own environment, would choose to set these defaults potentially to be a little bit more restrictive, because we're enabling access from any address out on the internet into port 2144, 22, 27019, and 27017. We can modify any one of these existing access groups, just like we can create new ones, through a pretty simple interface that lets us add additional rules, lets us delete rules, it lets us make modifications to any of the values from the protocol, the port, to port, and from port, as well as the CIDR. The last thing I'll point to is our integration with MMS. Now, what this does for you is it allows you to very quickly deploy an MMS agent within a particular target infrastructure. And so this, in the case of EC2, means within an availability zone. This places the MMS agent local to all the clusters you're deploying. It makes it very easy for you to add the hosts once the cluster has been provisioned on your behalf. And it's also extremely easy to add the agent itself. All you really need is the name of the group as you've established it in MMS, the API key necessary to communicate from the agent to the MMS service, select your target cloud, select the zone, and then size the agent's instance. Click Create, and it will kick off a job to provision a new virtual machine for you and install the agent software. It'll actually automatically wake up and register itself with MMS, And so that new agent will then be visible to MMS and available for use. So that's it. That was our quick demo. I appreciate the time you took to watch this demonstration. Please do get in touch with CumuLogic. You can email us at info@cumulogic.com, or you can come view us on our website at cumulogic.com. We'd love to hear from you. Again, this MongoDB edition of our platform will be available for a free trial period, both to be downloaded and run in your local environment. We'll have a few different image types available. We're also making it available on the Amazon Web Services Marketplace, so you can go look it up there.